Thank you, everyone. We're somewhat pleased to be the last group. That's always the pressure's on for us to perform as well as everyone else here has. So we've got some tough competition here and some great ideas. My name is Jana Joyce. I'm from the MBTW group in Toronto. And it's my pleasure to introduce Derek Lee from PWL Partnership, who's one of our co-design team members. We have a fairly large team, and they're listed here on the slide, but I'd like to kind of send a special thank you out to Raw Design, who is also here, and they were participating with us as our architectural consultant, and it was an amazing group. So at the end of our presentation, we'd like to bring everybody up who's here, who are participated on our team to help answer questions. So I see everyone's kind of scattered around, so that's great. We'd also like to thank Brad Golden, Golden and Associates for being our public art consultant. Brad himself had a lot of really great input into our design, and it was something that we felt that we really wanted to make sure was well integrated into our team effort. So thanks to Brad. I don't think he's here today, but we just wanted to mention that. So before we get started with kind of a description of our design, we just really want to thank the city for giving us an opportunity to describe our design vision or our interpretation of what your promenade park should be. We've had the pleasure of working with the City of Hamilton and public artists within the city and a variety of groups. And we just have had a great deal of experience in trying to understand how the community of Hamilton and how its people enjoy and utilize the public realm here in the city and all over the city, not just on the waterfront, but in the downtown areas and other areas as well. And just in our experience, I have never seen a municipality do art, culture, and community so well. So when our team got together and we started thinking about what our design approach would be for our design, we really felt that it was important that this was a place for people. And how do we interpret the context and interpret the heritage and interpret the things you see in the sense of place, and how do we knit that together to create a place that's really for the people of Hamilton, for the people who are close by, for the people who live farther away, who can travel to the site and enjoy the site. And then also, eventually, when it's built and it's a very successful place, it'll be a place for visitors to come to. So in that regard, our sort of brand of the design is, we call it a place to breathe. And although it seems maybe a little bit odd to you, looking at the other submissions and what are we thinking, why are they saying, is this a place to breathe? It's about people. And what do people do in these spaces when they're relaxing and they're enjoying the spaces? And they breathe, and they inhale, and they exhale. And that was really one of the fundamental themes and threads that traveled through all of our design decisions and our design proposals for how to organize the site in its physical form. So because we're the last group, and it'd be greater if it was a Friday, but it's a Thursday, we'd like everybody right now at the count of 3 to just take a deep breath, big breath, and then just exhale. So, okay, everybody ready? 1, 2, 3. I'm not gonna Great. So, a little bit cheesy, but I think it's okay. Yeah, Derek says it's okay. So, with my pleasure, I'm going to hand the presentation off to Derek, and he's going to give you a walkthrough of how our concept of providing inhale and exhale spaces is translated into physical form across the site.
Thank you very much. So a place to breathe, what does it really mean? Well, when you inhale, that's sort of a culmination of energy and intensity. And when you exhale, it's that passive, relaxing space that we aspire to experience. And I think that's really what we're trying to create in this project, is this idea, of inhaling and exhaling through the creation of a variety of different spaces. One thing that's really important to think about is that this is in fact a significantly sized space. We have everything that we need to operate within this space and to create through landscape measures, through hardscape and softscape, a variety of urban rooms of different scales that can feel comfortable during all times of the year, whether they're programmed intensely or whether they're left for passive and active use. And I think also within that, we want to think carefully about the program itself and thinking about what's fixed in a project and what's dynamic, what is considered infrastructure within what we're proposing, and what can be left for the public, the people, to manipulate and make their home. This is really an extension of people's living space, and we want this space, this proposal, to really exemplify that. So really to begin with, and to zoom out a little bit contextually, if you look at the diagram at the lower left-hand corner, really this site draws inspiration from several different entities that really do define Hamilton. We've talked a lot today about the industrial history of the site, and I think that's something that holds very true, and is a proud feature of Hamilton. It defines Hamilton, whether it's the ore processing and the steel milling and manufacturing. And that is really part of the DNA of what this project is all about. Panning to the west, of course, you get into the forested foothills and that green foreshore, and that also becomes a contrasting point of inspiration. And it's about those two components of this DNA of the site that we want to bring together to create a contrasting set of elements, the industrial hard elements and the more naturalistic soft elements. And how can we begin to think about that foreshore, given the fact that we have essentially a linear foreshore? What can we do within that foreshore to create that variety of experience of the water's edge? So I'll get into that very quickly here. So in the top left-hand corner, we have a very simple set of overlays that really describe this DNA of the site. Firstly, it's thinking about the regenerative and adaptable foreshore, and this idea that we have a harbor edge. Well, does that harbor edge need to be linear and straight? Of course not. We have this opportunity to really begin to undulate a particular moment of that edge, and that is sort of the 30% edge where we can release from the moorage requirements along the foreshore and really begin to sort of exemplify this idea of bringing back sort of this green regenerative foreshore environment that's inspiring of us. And you can see sort of this aerial photo at the top that really speaks to what you see when you pan across to the west of the site. Secondly, of course, the marine and industrial heritage. And we wanted to find some very clear pattern language to this site that really speaks to the history of the site right here. And those include the relic shed 7 and its truss structures that we can begin to reconstitute into not one but 3 distinct pavilions that really harken back to the architecture and the form that this site, that once defined the site during its industrial time. Secondly, of course, we have this idea of a memory band, and you can see this sort of perforated line. I'll use my pointer, sort of coming along here, that essentially demarcates in exact dimension a long shed that existed along that edge. And the portals and the openings, this idea of possibly using Corten steel and creating this idea of interpretation of people, places, events, and activities that once happened on the site. And then, of course, the active marine activities. One thing to think about here is that this is a living and thriving working waterfront, and it wants to continue to be that. And so the idea of identifying those active marine moorage areas and making that promenade not just a space for pedestrians, but a space for heavy vehicles, a space for loading and unloading. It's like a Granville Island. It's like this working waterfront. And I think that's going to add a lot of vitality to this space. So the third diagram that we see there is the idea of creating destinations within a linear experience. And when we begin to think about these linear experiences, there are certainly places to move through, but the biggest challenge is how do we create these moments that hold people, that create a place of pause, that create this sense of a series of outdoor rooms at different scales. And this is why, if I go back to this overlay here, you can see these sort of diagonal bands. This is inspired by the industrial pattern language of the ore processing. These incidental angles that are slightly askew, but what they create in terms of outdoor rooms is a progression of small to large outdoor rooms along this edge. And you can begin to see how that space, as it widens to narrow, creates sort of a series of intensities of different spaces. And so that's something that we really wanted to play with in our program overlay. The other thing too about the relic sheds as we sort of pan down to the next diagram here is the idea that we've taken shed 7 and we've created sheds 1, 2, and 3. So shed 1 is really at the termination of the greenway along here. This becomes an outdoor room for programming of farmers markets. It creates sort of a volumetric space that is of the size and scale of what existed there before. I think that's very important. It's within budget, so we don't need much to create that sense of scale. You know, it's a very, very simple structure with truss work, and the idea that we can potentially extend that repetition of the truss work as vertical elements to help lay claim to that larger space for farmers markets, events, outdoor festivals, what have you. At the ends of John Street and the end of Houston Street, we also have incarnations of that shed structure. The one at the end of John Street here becomes sort of an armature for ecological interventions. You know, we talk about sort of the barn swallow houses that could be put here. But also, it becomes an armature for, if you look in the orange here, this represents the different potential art interventions. So the idea of interpretive paneling, the idea of vertical elements at the Farmers Market Pavilion. And as we pan towards the shed number 3 at the end of Houston Street, that becomes sort of a termination point where, in fact, we have this sort of outdoor festival space. The idea of creating a container park, as mentioned earlier. It's not a new idea, but it does have an opportunity to program this space and utilize the proposed pump station as sort of an armature for those structured elements. So we're trying to be very strategic in terms of where we put these and how we can leverage existing proposed elements to build this sense of space and volume. What you see here, of course, is the proposed 1,500 square foot building with sort of a ramp that goes up to a viewpoint. This is the only item in our project that's outside of our budget. And of course, you can see it, how these spaces can unfold in the nighttime or in the winter. So we're really making a case for this to work all year round. Just very quickly, I wanted to walk you through, you know, this special moment along the site where we've, rather than pushing out to experience the water, we've pushed into away from the water. We've brought this notion of the water, the wetland in, and this idea of sort of a metal great bridge crossing that's slightly elevated, not a lot, but just slightly, so that you don't need handrails, you can use bull rails, and still create these moments where people can interact with the water's edge perpendicularly, rather than just simply walking parallel to the water's edge. And of course, this is you know, an opportunity for introduced native flora and fauna, and really to interpret this and to utilize this as a stormwater management facility as well. What am I missing here? These are just some additional details that show kind of these two conditions, the typical 70% moorage condition along the waterfront, and how we can opt for a slightly lower profile of the proposed shore wall to achieve this undulating stormwater management facility. This image up here kind of gives you a very, you know, flexible idea of program along the east shore. You know, a lot of what we were doing here was inspired by what's happening now in the Auckland waterfront, whereby, you know, it's industrial. It's the idea of having rough and ready, flexible, movable furniture that can come in and really animate this space. We have grade changes, and I should note that within the plan, all of the grade changes are less than 5%. So there is no ramping per se. It's all accessible, and by creating these sort of skewed spaces, we create a variety of different terraced seating conditions. So with that, I just wanted to hand it over to Jana.
Okay, great. Thanks, Derek. So what we'd like to take is the last couple of minutes and just sort of sum up, you know, our big idea for the plan. Again, sort of coming back to the idea that this is a place for people to use and enjoy. And, you know, we read all of the requirements quite carefully. We read the guidelines, and we understand that adaptability and flexibility is very important here. So a lot of the elements that we unfortunately today don't have a lot of time to tell you about, But many of the elements that are embedded within our plan are kind of dual purpose elements. So there's no single purpose built elements within the plan, so that each and any of the spaces could be altered or adapted now, tomorrow, or even in the future, because the community hasn't been built yet that's adjacent. And so we wanted to make sure that there was flexibility integrated into the plan so that things could change. And if there's new civic programming that comes online, if the super crawl ends up coming down and joining in with the waterfront, that there's ways that all of that could be accommodated and integrated. So we think that was a really, really important part of the plan, and we hope that that translates through to the materials that you're going to review. I'd like to point out now that we're on this panel here that there's a kind of a red dashed line around the master plan, and our master plan does overlap onto the third and fourth board. So we have noted here the limits, the project limits, which is that red dashed line. And we worked very hard with our cost consultant to make sure that we could be able to deliver as much of this landscape as possible within the given budget. One thing I'd like to clarify is that the public art integration strategy that we're proposing is actually two-phased. And the relic sheds that Derek had spoken about that Raw Design has helped us develop, there's 3 of them on the site. So this diagram, kind of the one in the middle there, and when you see the boards a little bit closer, I think it'll be a little bit more clear. But the row of diagrams along the top there, this park construction endeavor would include the construction of the framework of these features, and then our team has elected to include a first phase of public art integration, which would be for each of the 3 relic sheds. There would be a public art installation or integration into the structures. So there would be 3 opportunities to include a public artist within the design team to develop some kind of feature that would coordinate with the relic sheds. And our intention is, because these relic sheds are aligned on the view termini of Hewson and John and also the proposed greenway, that this is also a great way to couple the public art expression into an expression of heritage. So if we have any input, or it's possible for us to have input into theming, that we would work with the artists that would be integrated with our team to help develop a narrative and a story that would tell a lot about the marine and industrial heritage and any other heritage that we think we would like to explore. It doesn't have to be the same artist for all 3 pieces. They could be 3 different artists. And we really felt that this more sort of granular, accessible approach to public art in the first phase, with my experience with Hamilton, is a very Hamilton thing to do. And I hope I'm not wrong, and I'm making a horrible mistake here. But it's one of the things that we really enjoyed working with Hamilton, is that the art is accessible. People understand it. It's available and accessible for people to understand and to touch and feel. The second phase of the public art strategy is at the northeast corner. So the prominent promenade at the corner there, we called that our stage 2 public art strategy. And what we're proposing there is that's a location for a significant public art piece that would bookend the existing Rafaga Unleashed that exists to the west right now, so that it would almost be a sister piece to that piece that exists. That second stage of the public art strategy is not part of our budget. So that would be something that the city would undertake as a separate process. So that sums up. We wish we had days to talk to you about this. This is a simple yet very complex project. And as I said earlier, we're very pleased to be able to participate in this process with you. And we look very much forward to the public comment. We really kind of engineered our whole process to try to find a solution that would work for the people of Hamilton and that they would embrace, and it would really plug into a great community that's already here. And with that, that's the end of our presentation. Can I have our team come up? Oh, sure. Okay. Oh. Okay, team, everybody up here.
Remember, use the mic for us, please. Questions? Linda.
Thank you. I have a question, but I'm going to direct it to staff because I think it relates to all the presentations, and I've just been wondering, Ken, those mixed-use buildings, do they front onto the promenade or do they back onto the promenade? And how do you see those courtyard spaces interacting with the promenade? I think it's important as a juror to understand how the city sees that built form relating to this significant public space.
I'm going to have to go in and review the urban design study to be 100% sure, and we'll make sure we have that for you at the jury meeting. But it's my understanding it's a mixed use at grade and the buildings above. Which way the courtyards face, I don't know if that's been determined. I don't know if Chris can speak to that if he's still here. Yeah, so that's the idea. But we'll check that out before we get to final jury meeting. Any other questions for MBTW and PWL? Okay, I think, sure, Linda.
I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about those marsh areas that you've created. You've sort of said you pushed in as opposed to pushing out. So I'm assuming they have significant stormwater management and ecological function. So I'd like to know a little bit more about that.
So we have a two-part answer. One is kind of more from the technical side. What we're proposing is that the reconstructed seawall that is under a separate contract in progress right now would actually remain more or less at the same elevation that the seawall is right now. The areas adjacent to that, so the hard foreshore, we're recommending is about 65 centimeters higher. So the edge would actually be hard. It would be a hard seawall edge. Beyond that, as you come into the site and what we're calling our lower foreshore or our green foreshore space, would have a softer surface treatment there. The intention is it's a green expression, so there would be plant material there. But we would also have a series of boulders and rocks that would help dissipate the wave energy as it overtops the seawall. The intent here is that we're not deflecting the wave action, but we're actually inviting it into a controlled area of the design so that when people visit the site during a storm or they visit the site after a storm, they can see what happens, that some of maybe the rocks move around or the plant material moves around. So it becomes kind of a dynamic narrative about what, you're right on the water. Like, you can't ignore the water, it's right there. So how do you bring it closer safely? And then also include it in like an educational and interpretive narrative for the site as well. So the elevated walkway that Derek mentioned, what we envision is that it's an elevated walkway. Again, it's only about 60 centimeters above surrounding grade, but we are proposing that it's like a metal mesh, like a galvanized steel mesh decking, so that when the wave overtopping does happen, it just washes right through the decking. And the waves can do their thing and the decking can do its thing. But it's a sustainable material that, it's not slippery when it's wet. It'll have a grit to it because of the metal decking. So it'll be slip resistant, and that was something that we know is very important for this public space. Does that more or less, we've got more. We can go on.
I think there were several teams that acknowledged that the water will overtop and that the high water level will overtop the existing pier. So is that, I'm just surprised some people acknowledged it and other people didn't, but was that information that you gathered yourself, or was that something that the city provided to you?
Okay.
Perhaps it's best if there was a wave uprush study that gave the 76.6 level as the kind of minimum for wave. So we've already had some discussion back and forth in terms of clarification letters with this team about how that water edge would work, and there's some details that'll have to be worked out to see if it'll work the way they're intending.
And if I can just append that response, we do have AMEC, Foster Wheeler, as part of our design consultant team. They're a civil engineer. Their civil engineering division is actually working with the city right now on stormwater management strategy for the whole site, including the private development site. So we have been able to work with them quite in depth about what elevations that seawall should be, how can we push the envelope, can we raise it? Because the higher you make the seawall, the more protection there is for the new assets that you're building to the south and to the west of it. But we also recognize that the more you fill, the more expensive things get. So we're trying to find that balance.
Very good. Anyone else with any questions of clarification? Lots and lots of information today. Thank you very much.